Welcome. I'm Tricia Park. I'm the Artistic Director of MusicIC, and this is a very special presentation in our opening event for our 13th season, hard to believe, and it's entitled 3 Essays, Music and Literature in Conversation. It's an extraordinary privilege and honor to be here today to share this pre-recorded conversation that I somehow inserted myself in with Pulitzer Prize winning novelist and essayist Marilynne Robinson and Pulitzer Prize and Grammy Award winning composer Caroline Shaw. Today, these remarkable artists are going to talk about Caroline's string quartet, 3 Essays, the first movement of which was inspired by Marilynne Robinson's writing. We're going to play some of the string quartet here for you, and you'll get a little sneak peek, and then we're going to play it in its entirety tomorrow at Trinity Church at 7:30. We hope you'll come to that. 3 Essays was a 2023 Grammy Award winner as part of the Attaka Quartet, their album Evergreen, which won Best Chamber Music Small Ensemble Performance. It's kind of silly to do this because I don't think you need to really know who these people are, but I'm going to start off by giving a brief introduction to both of these luminaries, although they don't really need an introduction. So I'll start with Marilynne. Marilynne Robinson is an American novelist and essayist. Across her writing career, Robinson has received numerous awards, including the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and the 2016 Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. Also in 2016, Robinson was named in Time magazine's list of 100 most influential people, and Robinson began teaching at the Iowa Writers' Workshop here in Iowa City in 1991 and retired in the spring of 2016. She is currently Professor Emeritus at the workshop. She was also the recipient of a 2012 National Humanities Medal, awarded by President Barack Obama for her, quote, grace and intelligence in writing. And the New York Review of Books published a 2-part conversation between Obama and Robinson covering topics in American history and the role of faith in society. And you can find that online. Caroline Shaw is a musician who moves among roles, genres, and mediums, trying to imagine a world of sound that has never been heard before but has always existed. She works often in collaboration with others as producer, composer, violinist, and vocalist. Caroline is the recipient of the 2013 Pulitzer Prize in Music, several Grammy Awards, an honorary doctorate from Yale, and a Thomas J. Watson Fellowship. Her favorite color is yellow, and her favorite smell is rosemary. So please welcome via video Marilynne Robinson and Caroline Shaw. Hello, and welcome to this special presentation and opening event for MusicIC 2023, entitled 3 Essays, Music and Literature in Conversation. My name is Tricia Park, and I am the founding artistic director of MusicIC. It's an extraordinary privilege and honor to speak today with Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist and essayist Marilynne Robinson and Pulitzer Prize and Grammy Award-winning composer Caroline Shaw. These remarkable artists will talk about Caroline's string quartet, 3 Essays, the first movement of which was inspired by Marilynne's writing. Segments of the string quartet will be performed live in tandem with the conversation. 3 Essays was a 2023 Grammy Award winner as part of the Attaka Quartet's album Evergreen, which won Best Chamber Music / Small Ensemble Performance. Let me start off by giving a brief introduction to both of these luminaries, although they hardly need introduction. First, Marilynne Robinson is an American novelist and essayist. Across her writing career, Robinson has received numerous awards, including the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2005 and the 2016 Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. Also in 2016, Robinson was named in Time magazine's list of 100 most influential people. Robinson began teaching at the Iowa Writers' Workshop in 1991 and retired in the spring of 2016. She is Professor Emeritus at the workshop. Robinson is perhaps best known for her novels, Housekeeping and Gilead. Her novels are noted for their thematic depiction of faith and rural life, The subjects of her essays span numerous topics, including the relationship between religion and science, US history, nuclear pollution, John Calvin, and contemporary American politics. Robinson has written 5 highly acclaimed novels: Housekeeping, Gilead, Home, Lila, and Jack. Housekeeping was a finalist for the 1982 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. Gilead was awarded the 2005 Pulitzer, and Home received the 2009 Women's Prize for Fiction, previously known as the Orange Prize. Robinson's nonfiction books include The Givenness of Things, When I Was a Child, I Read Books, Absence of Mind, The Death of Adam, and Mother Country, which was nominated for a National Book Award. She was the recipient of a 2012 National Humanities Medal awarded by President Barack Obama for, quote, her grace and intelligence in writing. The New York Review of Books published a 2-part conversation between Obama and Robinson covering topics in American history and the role of faith in society. Caroline Shaw is a musician who moves among roles, genres, and mediums, trying to imagine a world of sound that has never been heard before, but has always existed. She works often in collaboration with others as producer, composer, violinist, and vocalist. Caroline is the recipient of the 2013 Pulitzer Prize in Music, several Grammy Awards, an honorary doctorate from Yale, and a Thomas J. Watson Fellowship. This year's projects alone include the score to Fleischman is in Trouble, vocal work with Rosalia, the score to Josephine Decker's The Sky is Everywhere, music for the National Theater's production of The Crucible, Justin Peck's Partita with New York City Ballet, a new stage work, Life, the premiere of Microfictions Volume 3 for the New York Philharmonic and Roomful of Teeth, a live orchestral score for Wu Zhang's silent film Moby Dick, co-composed with Andrew Yi, 2 albums on Nonsuch, the score for Helen Simoneau's dance work Delicate Power, tours of graveyards and gardens, co-created immersive theatrical work with Vanessa Goodman, and tours with So Percussion, featuring songs from Let the Soil Play Its Simple Part, and occasional chamber music appearances as violist with Chamber Music Society of Minnesota and La Jolla Music Society. Caroline has written over 100 works in the last decade for Anne-Sophie von Otter, Devon Tynes, Yo-Yo Ma, Renee Fleming, Don Upshaw, the LA Philharmonic, Philharmonia Baroque, Seattle Symphony, Cincinnati Symphony, Izuri Quartet, The Crossing, Dover Quartet, Calidor Quartet, Brooklyn Rider, Miro Quartet, I Giardini, Ars Nova Copenhagen, Ariadne Greif, Brooklyn Youth Chorus, Brit Festival, and the Vale Dance Festival. She has contributed production to albums by Rosalia, Woodkid, and Nas. Her work as vocalist or composer has appeared in several films, TV series, and podcasts, including The Humans, Bombshell, Yellow Jackets, Made, Dark, Beyoncé's Homecoming, Tar, Dolly Parton's America, and More Perfect. Her favorite color is yellow, and her favorite smell is rosemary. Please welcome Marilynne Robinson and Caroline Shaw. So first off, this is correct in my assumption that this is the first conversation you're having about 3 essays, and maybe even the first time you guys are meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Amazing. So in preparation for this conversation, I had the overwhelming experience of attempting to distill to their fundamental elements the vast expanse of both of your bodies of work, and to consider how and where they intersect. And while this, of course, is really impossible, you've heard the bios, the audience has heard the bios, there's just such a vast range of work and ideas and topics that you all cover. But it did eventually become clear that possibly a good starting point for today's conversation would be about voice, both literal voice and figurative voice. And the strength and uniqueness of an artist's voice is a crucial component of creative work that compels and draws us in as readers, listeners, and viewers. And it's something that is present in spades in both of your work. So Caroline, I wonder if we could start with you. Marilynne's voice is a big part of what you say you're responding to in the writing of 3 essays. And in your composer's note, you say, I started writing these 3 essays while listening to the calm optimism of an audio recording of Marilynne Robinson reading from her book, The Givenness of Things. But I completed it.
Incorrect in that, but I'll clarify.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Okay, so you're going to clarify. Very good. But so then why don't you start? I basically wanted to see if you would talk a little bit about the inspiration of this piece.
Sure, I can just begin my correction of that. I was reading through the thing that I was listening to was actually Marilynne's recording of when I was a child, I read books, which is I don't know if you've read The Givenness of Things. I think it's a different narrator, but that's something that I've read by myself. But it was, I think, the fall maybe of 2016. And I had written a lot of string quartets, and I had this commission for some friends of mine in the Calidor Quartet. And it was, you know, the time of American politics in 2016 were pretty unbelievable. And I was trying to find my grounding kind of amid the election. And also I was just really busy at the time and kind of traveling a lot. And I was working with Kanye West in the Moment and on tour. And I was trying to just sort of remember who I was and how I fell in love with music and what music means to me and what it was that I wanted to say. And I've written music about a lot of different things. And I began listening to, when I was a child, I read books. I had read Housekeeping and Gilead, but I really love nonfiction. I love essays in particular. And I found myself, it was just that Marilynne's voice was in my ears for a very long time. And it was just the reflection on theology and politics and science, and knowing that I was sort of getting from that, and also the givenness of things, that I found really grounding. And it also sort of just got me thinking about, I'm not a writer of words. This is the most uncomfortable thing, because I'm here with a great writer of words and I'm having to use words. Music is what I usually use to communicate. I'm really sorry. But I love thinking about how writers begin to write an essay, begin to write a character. Where does it start and where do you sort of end up, and how do you construct the thing, and how does it change over time? And I wanted to do something like that with music, that starts in a kind of maybe familiar place and then changes over time. And I became really enamored with the lilt and musicality of your voice, Marilynne, which we've never met before. It was something that just became the seed of the piece for me. So how do you create something that feels, I'm telling you something important with a certain cadence, and then that cadence kind of becomes something else. And I was sort of also just navigating ideas of communication and the internet and what was happening in politics at the time. That was a long intro, but I wanted to clarify that it was when I was a child I read books.
Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead, Marilynne.
For my fiction particularly, but for my novels, I mean, for my nonfiction also, I begin with a voice, and that's something that's always sort of mystified me. I hear a voice in my head, maybe just a few phrases that are not mine. I mean, obviously they are, but the sensation is not of the ordinary conversation I have with myself, you know. It's a sensation of, I'm going to let you know something that you don't know, you know. I'm going to tell you a story. I don't know. I think it might be a little bit like composing music, in the sense that you might hear a phrase in your mind, and just hearing it, no, somehow or other, you know that a great deal more lies behind that phrase, you know. That's I mean, I don't write. People have noticed that there are hiatuses in my career. But I truly don't write fiction, particularly if I do not have the sense that I am indeed dealing with a voice, not my voice. I'm not inventing.
Mm.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. And it's interesting. That's something that, as I was researching for this conversation, that really struck me, the ways in which both of you, from a process standpoint, it's a very musical process. So I'm hoping that's something we'll get to in the conversation today. Before we move much deeper into the conversation, I wonder, Marilynne, would you be comfortable talking, sort of doing a little bit of a short reading so we can hear your reading voice, because your actual reading voice is also such a huge layer of, I think it sounds like the inspiration for Caroline, but also you're really kind of known for your sort of recitation of your work.
The primary condition of our existence is a mystery as virginal as it has always been. Science may at some point be able to say meaningful things about time. I can't imagine what even a tentative account of it would look like. But I am no scientist, certainly no mathematician. In fact, the descriptions I read of epigenetics or of quantum phenomena might as well be of genies and dervishes, for all the ground they seem to provide for explanation of the familiar kind, so long considered scientific. Our genes are not fixed like beads on a string. The physical world is not simple and solid. To be meaningful, a statement need not be falsifiable, nor is it falsified in not satisfying a particular, sometimes tendentious standard of meaning or truth. The reality we experience is given in the sense that it is, for our purposes, lawful, allowing hypotheses and predictions, or available at least to being construed retrospectively in terms of cause and effect. It is given in a deeper sense in the fact that it is emergent. The genome accomplishes its microteleologies. A thought elaborates itself, finding its way to conclusion, recruiting memory, bias, and mood, among other things, all more or less persistent, most of them unconscious and unarticulable. Our singularity lies above all in the negotiation the mind makes with itself, of which we ourselves know very little. W.B. Yeats called it the long-legged fly upon the stream, moving upon silence.
So circling back to thoughts about voice, I was talking with Amy Margolis, Marilynne, who is director of the Iowa Summer Writing Festival, with whom MusicIC has been partnered for many years. And she shared with me that she had the great good fortune to study with you at the workshop in 1991 when you first started teaching there. And Amy describes your reading voice as a song that imbues her writing with another texture, another layer of meaning. And I wonder, at this point in your life and career, if you have an awareness of the power of your voice, and if so, how does that weigh in your life and your work now as you're thinking about projects moving forward and just at this current moment?
I don't really, as I said before, I don't really think of it as my voice, you know. I do think of it as, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, language is music. The fact that I mean, we've been sunk in print for 500 years, you know, so we tend to think of language as something lying on a page. But in fact, you know, in all its brilliance and beauty, it is something that we all invent continuously among ourselves. Um, and you know, that's why the distinctiveness of a voice is so important. Why, you know, I have to be sure that, you know, that one of my characters is using has a different voice than the character standing beside him, you know. Um, so you know, I feel that the difference between language and music is artificial. That they're both probably equally ancient, you know, and probably always related, for example, in epic and so on, you know, and psalms, all that. Um, so in other words, it's not an accident if my language when I write sounds like music, because that's exactly what I aspire to, actually. You know,
Mm.
granting all the difficulties involved.
Yeah, Caroline, is there anything you want to say in response to that before I keep sort of jumping in?
Well, it's nice to hear a theory that I had in my head echoed by someone that I admire. I there's other music that I've written for human voices, but without traditional language, just kind of the sound of the voice. And I'm really interested in our kind of prelingual state as humans, and what we say to each other without all of the consonants and syllables and vowels that we're used to using when we communicate. And what can we say with just the edges of language? And I'm really sort of curious about not only how sort of the edges of language can become music, but how the construction of sentences and the flow of them and the kind of relationship of large and small scale things in writing is really musical, and feels like a sense of kind of, as you said, like I'm saying something important, and then sort of the way that gets fleshed out is something that I really love to do in music. And just to talk about, I think, to address your initial question for me about just maybe the idea of the voice as an artist. I don't know if that's part of the question, but it's something that I find myself really both resistant to, and also I'm sort of resigned to at this point. This idea of finding your voice as a young artist, or a young writer of any kind, is something that we talk about, but then we're constantly kind of shifting voices and shifting perspectives and shifting, whether it's characters or styles or sounds or chords. Like, you're always changing, but there are certain things that we come back to. And I hope that in many years from now, maybe I'll have a better perspective on what I do. But this idea of having a voice as an artist is something that I both question and maybe know might ultimately be real.
Yeah, it seems to me like the concept of voice is a very like all-encompassing one. So there's sort of the artistic or narrative voice, or the voice, the sort of watermark, or the sort of imprint of the individual artist, that voice. And then there's the performative voice of either music or text being performed or consumed. And then there's the relationship between composer and performer and audience. And then there's the relationship between writer and reader. So I think I think we'd all be really interested to hear about all of the aspects of that. And for me, the sort of spine of today's conversation has to do with trying to see it's very exciting to hear that you both had kind of similar instincts and connected across, like, it seems very mystical, like crossing any sort of human boundaries, because this is the first time you're meeting even. So I think that's really exciting. I'm wondering if we could, for a second, Marilynne, I was in researching for today, there was a conversation you had with Aro Kwan, and also your profile in the New Yorker, where you talk about each sentence being right, and you also talk about voice, and as you were saying, the characters sort of coming to you. And like you said, it does feel very musical. It feels similar to, as a musician, trying to hear the sounds before externalizing them on an instrument or in actual sound. And you've also said that because of this practice, you don't revise that much. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that process. Like, what do you think, to the extent that you can articulate it or comfortable articulating it, what you think happens in your mind when you are first encountering the voice of a character, or when things start to feel right, as you said?
Well, I think you could say that when, you know, a voice, it opens a terrain. And then the way in which, a voice that might be called mine becomes specific to a terrain that in many cases is not mine, or is memory or something like that. I think that I think that that's a bigger choice that a writer or an artist makes than even the question of finding a voice, because art tends to repeat itself. People tend to replicate what they've admired, and this can be, positive. It can also be very narrowing. And I think that if you look at the world fresh, to the extent that's possible, you'll always find that 99% of it is unrepresented in art of any kind. And that by claiming it, you're sort of giving a collective property to readers, because they know by experience, they live in that 99% that is not represented for the most part. And I'm not just talking about I'm not talking specifically about, for example, contemporary circumstances in a particular country. I'm talking about the fact that the world awaits the acknowledgement of someone who will interpret it as art. And this is always true and everywhere true, And the crucial thing is to step out of what you take to be the obvious subject of art. And, I was very happy to write Housekeeping, or to realize that in writing it, I could actually describe a terrain that nobody had written about before. It was all mine. I didn't have to worry about, cliches hovering around in the landscape or anything. I just, to the extent that you have the experience of doing something sort of radical in the strict sense, it's because you feel as if you're claiming some part of the world that has not been owned up to before, that its particular beauty is not acknowledged, not explored.
Caroline, I wonder if you'd be open to talking a little bit, like in response to that, because you were saying how you write vocal music, but it's also almost pre-verbal.
Yeah, what you were just saying, Marilynne, makes me think of sort of looking for the beauty of, like, the beauty where someone hasn't noticed it before, or the beauty of small things. There's something that people say, how do you start when you start a piece? What do you start? Where do you start? And I usually think of something that is not music, an object or a person or a thing or an essay or something that is not music, and ask, what if that thing was music, what would it be? And I've done this a couple of times with an orange, which is my favorite thing. Is like, here's a beautiful orange. It's like the common grocery store orange that it's ubiquitous, you see it everywhere, but it is exquisite, it is complex, it is like, there's so many details in it. And if that thing was music, what would it sound like? It's like, if it could be, if it exploded and became something. And then usually that's the seed of the piece, and then the whole piece isn't directly a translation of the orange, but it's like a fun, playful, it's like being a child again. Like, what if this thing, like make believe, what if this thing was music? And then I have a later, my second orange piece is like this idea of the thing that is every day, that you see every day, is the 1,000th orange that you eat is just as beautiful as the first one. This idea of it is the 1,000th thing. So playing, something I do a lot in music is playing with really familiar chord progressions, something that you feel like you've heard before. I really love a lot of hymns, so there's a lot of things that feel sort of like kind of hymn-like, or almost like a pop song that you've heard 100 times before. but repeating that same things and kind of different perspectives every time, so that that same little chord progression, which people usually throw away, is like, it's every day it's been there. It's a trope, it's a cliche, but there's something really beautiful, and each time you see it a little bit differently. So I really love this idea of kind of finding, if my memory now of what you said, Marilynne, is like this idea of something that hasn't been expressed as art before. Most things are not expressed as art, but if it was, what would that look like? How do you describe it? How do you capture it or communicate it, or just give it life in the way that kids sort of do all the time? But and Tricia, what you asked about in terms of writing music for this sort of pre-lingual state of ourselves, I really love, like, Partita does this, and there's a couple of other pieces for Roomful of Teeth. There's one called the Isle, which is kind of based on Shakespeare's The Tempest, this idea of what did this place sound like before there was language, before someone came and gave us words and gave us nouns and verbs and all these things. What did we say to each other, and what would we say to each other, and how would we express this weird thing called, I don't know, humanity, or time on the human condition. And trying to do that in music, constantly trying to do it, knowing it's impossible. But if you could try, what would it sound like? What do we say to each other without words? What do you say in the pauses? And that's where kind of this listening to Marilynne's voice, and also just listening to the spaces between words and the cadences of sentences. It's like, what is someone saying in between the content? What's the magic in the parentheticals that you could like capture and love? Yeah.
This is not entirely relevant, but a man said a wonderful thing to me once. I was doing a reading in a literary society in London, and a man in the audience said, American writers have a great advantage because they have such a beautiful dialect. And I had never before heard anyone say that Americans have a beautiful dialect. but I think, why quarrel with a man who hears it differently than I ever could? Maybe it's very beautiful. In any case, the idea that beauty is potential in language, I think, is a great strengthening of anyone's writing, because we have a tendency to, to routinize language, and not listen to ourselves enough, or not listen to what we're putting on a page, So I always tell my students about this man and his idea of our beautiful dialect, because I think any writer anywhere in any language has a great blessing bestowed on her or him by being attentive to the fact that the language that is usual for them, that is habitual for them, is also beautiful.
Mm.
That really brings to mind, Marilynne, I found a quote of yours saying that you likened hymns to a sort of universally shared poetry. And that kind of, in my mind, was connecting to Caroline, what you said about playing harmonies or playing with things. You're both talking about, it seems to me, like questioning ordinariness or the small things, or going quiet in order to hear again or see again. Marilynne, I know that I also read somewhere that you said when you were writing Housekeeping that you would would close the shutters and sit in this very dark room and try to remember. Can you talk about stillness and listening, both internally and externally, and what roles those have in your writing process? And maybe also, if it makes sense, what you're in conversation with when you're in the solitude of your work?
Well, it was purely accidental that I wrote so much of Housekeeping in that situation. I was living in a farmhouse in France, a rural house, and all the little kids in the neighborhood thought I was interesting, being such an exotic. And they would come and tap on the windows, and of course the windows in a French house go all the way to the floor, And so I couldn't work undistracted with this going on. So I went into a back room and I closed the shutters because then they couldn't watch me. And that made the room absolutely dark, So I had a little tottering, bedside lamp and a spiral notebook and a pen. And I was in this room writing about a place that I had left 17 years previously. And the thing that it was a tremendous watershed experience for me because I found out that I remembered things that I could not believe I would remember. I found out that I had another mind that attended and accompanied me and that saved things that I was glad to have saved, although I would not have thought of trying to save them myself. It was I found out that I had certain fascinations and that there were certain words that I overused and all sorts of things about, being deeply interior in that way. But a lot of the, in a way, it was very important to the book because the intensity of what I remembered was very much a result of the intensity of childhood experience itself, you know. Um, and so I simply found out, to put it very simply, that my brain is smarter than I am. My mind is larger than my sense of my mind. And that if I do myself the favor of truly concentrating, I have access to much more in terms of consciousness and so on, memory, association, learnedness, and so on, than I would ever have known that was there, And I think that we have a tendency to use the sort of front office of our mind, this sort of get through the day aspects of human life, but we're not that simple and we're not that poor, I think that really the mark of someone who's really writing is the sense that you have that they have access, they know more than they know, that the richness that accompanies them as consciousnesses through life is actually accessible to them. That's what I think.
That's so beautiful. It brings to mind a line in When I Was a Child, I Read Books, which I did just coincidentally, Caroline. I was listening to the audio of Marilynne reading that book, but I think it's in the second chapter, Freedom of Thought, that essay that I believe you write. For me, at least, writing consists largely of exploring intuition. I wonder if, related to what you just said, Marilynne, but Caroline, to invite you, can you both talk a little bit about the role of intuition? Because it's sort of, we've been dancing around it already, but what that means for your practice and for the choices that you make, especially maybe, Caroline, you were talking about how do things begin. Would you mind talking about that, both of you? Exploring intuition. Marilynne, maybe you could start by sharing a little bit more about that line. For me, at least, writing consists largely of exploring intuition.
Well, one of the things, I used to take other people's advice from time to time. And one of the things I was told to do is keep a journal, And so I would, from time to time, find a nice, attractive little black book and try keeping a journal. And when I went back to it, well, when a week had passed, I would find that there was nothing of interest in it, that everything that I thought was striking and memorable had utterly evaporated from my memory and consciousness, but that I had nevertheless very sharply remembered things that I would not have thought of consciously as being significant or redolent or anything else. I found out that my memory, as a sort of the consequence of selection, that it is capable of, it was a much better judge of what I would want to know than conscious attempts I made to memorialize things, which tended to just embarrass me in retrospect, And so you know, you think, well, in what way did I know that specific detail would extrapolate from itself in a way in so many suggestive and interesting ways? You know, how I didn't know that, but I knew it, you know. It's intuition that makes you understand things to be true that you would not find possible to confirm in the moment of the perception, you know.
Yeah, intuition is such a, I rely on it a lot, and I think I've tried to sort of practice writing music enough that I can trust the intuition in the moment. I feel like I just tell, you know, young composers, like, it takes a lot of practice to write and to understand yourself and to know that when the moment comes, it feels like performing. As a violinist, I mean, Tricia, you know, you practice so that in the moment of performance, you're not thinking about it. You're not thinking about the shift. You're not thinking about, how do I do the bow just so that it can do what I want. It's like, it just is intuition at that point, grounded in all of the underground engineering that you've put in. And there's you talk about, like, sort of the front, using the front office of our brain. It's like there's parts of the writing process that for I say writing, it's, I don't know, music, but that rely on the front office has to be operating in some way, just to hold it together. But to be able to feel like I'm improvising a lot when I'm writing, where the things that, it's sort of like, yeah, this idea of the things that you remember, relying on memory and gosh, it's hard to describe this feeling of, again, writing something that I feel like has always existed. It feels like it is already been said, but not in this particular way. Also sort of enjoying the things that I enjoy, like the chords the harmonies that I love. And again, it's like, when I was a kid, my deepest musical experiences were singing hymns in church. So that's like somewhere in me, even if I'm not religious now, it is like the thing that will make me cry. And it's the thing that I return to kind of all the time, but then kind of breaking them up and saying something new with the chords. What if it went over here? What if it opened this door? But there's still this sense of, like, what ultimately moves me, what, like, moves my heart and my brain at the same time. And that is something that is intuition. It cannot be, as soon as it becomes front office constructed, it loses something, or it doesn't feel honest, or, yeah, I don't know.
It's really, like, I'm feeling very almost emotional about this, because I feel like as someone who has always had that feeling of, I don't really know what I'm doing, and then something will happen. I've always felt slightly embarrassed that I feel sometimes that I'm kind of an intuitive person in creative work. And so I feel very validated by hearing both of you, because it sounds to me almost like it's a little bit, Elizabeth Gilbert has this TED talk where she talks about the concept of genius as being a fairly contemporary one, in terms of us individuating in that way and sort of assuming that it's all coming from us. But when I'm hearing you both talk, what I am sensing is this feeling, kind of like Caroline, you're saying about music existing always, but we just did it somehow. I mean, I'm paraphrasing you, but this having always existed, almost like we're just like going in and out, or opening a door to something that's been like going on the whole time. And that's, yeah, that's what it seems to me too with Marilynne, what you're saying, this capacity that you discovered upon the realities of that moment when you were writing Housekeeping, the little kids tapping and bothering you, but that to go inside and to be closer to something that is both deeper in you but also like bigger than you, sounds to me a little bit. I think that's what I'm responding to, hearing both of you say that. Caroline, so one of the things I love about your writing is that you have these wonderful instructions for the performers. And for your first essay, Nimrod, which is inspired by Marilynne's work, the first instruction is parlando, rubato, quasi animato, non troppo, and that's all like normal for us. And then at the very end, it says with a little Midwest lilt. I don't know why I'm having trouble saying that. With a little Midwest lilt. And you have similarly whimsical, evocative instructions like this throughout the performance, like accelerating tremolo like a flustered politician. That's
Oh
a
yeah,
fun one.
forgot
And
about
you
that.
you write a skosh faster. And I love skosh. I was like, oh, I didn't know that that's how you spell skosh.
I don't
And
know
then,
if it is how you spell skosh.
but I loved it. I was like, yes, that's how you spell skosh. Another one was tight, angular with a wink. And I was like, Emma, are we supposed to actually wink when we play? I think it's a pizzicato passage. And then another favorite says, just make a wild mess in this bar. And my brain imagined like the string quartet going into a tavern and like just making a huge mess and like having a fight and throwing peanut shells on the floor. But these things are just part of what makes playing your music really wonderful. And I was wondering if you could talk about how you make these instructional choices and how they might be in this particular piece in conversation with Marilynne's work.
Yeah, well, that first one, the like parlando poco quasi something 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 non troppo with a little Midwest lilt was kind of it's like a little wink to, I think Beethoven has in one of his quartets, there's a very, very long instruction that's like quasi una something something something, but not too much. It's like really controlling. and I just wanted to put, it's like, but also say it a little bit like this. So it's kind of a like maybe just disarms everybody from the beginning and hints to the musicality of Marilynne's voice that I was kind of after in the beginning. And the other ones are this, I think humor is really hard to write in music, and it's really hard to get across in a score. Humor or just kind of, making it say like, this doesn't have to be so serious all the time. There could be something kind of like, I'm telling you, it's like I'm telling you something, but I'm saying something else at the same time. It's like, how do you play that way? How do you write it? And that little bit of like, oh yeah, tremolando, like a flustered politician. It was, it was the 2016 election, and all of like everyone's communication was just so like, it was just really awful at the time, and everyone sort of gets flustered and no one knows what they're talking about. But the internet, people are just yelling at each other and short bits of words. And how do you kind of create that feeling kind of in this music? But one of the things that I think really was responding to in Marilynne's writing, and both in when I was a child, I read books on the giveness of things at the time, was this like, how do we communicate with each other? How do we, what is, epistemology, what is knowledge, what do we actually know, what are we trying to say, how do you how can we understand what is true and what is not true? Anyway, all that kind of in a weird little tornado became this music, and I tried to hint at it a little bit with these instructions. You have so little time with the performer as a composer. It really just, now it's, you just give this weird document of dots and lines and says, here, these are the notes to play and these are when to play them. But it's really hard to say something about who you are as a person and what you want them to sort of feel and the approach. It's hard to put that in there. I wish we had that from Mozart and Beethoven and Bach, but we don't, just once in a while.
Yeah, you've both said, I think, in different ways, some riff off of, oh, I'm trying to tell you something. And as Caroline, the composer in this particular case, like you said, we have such limited amount of space with which to communicate with the performer, by extension, the listener. Marilynne, you've also said, I'm trying to tell you this something in terms of hearing when a voice comes to you in your fiction. I'm wondering, Marilynne, would you talk a little bit too about that relationship of the writer to the reader? I know you're also known for giving really beautiful sermons at the Congregational Church in Iowa City. I don't know if that's still something you do on occasion when you're in town. But could you talk too about, I've heard writing described as a conversation between the writer and the reader.
Actually, I don't I don't really think about the reader so much, I mean, it's an odd thing. It always surprises me in a way that readers read what I write. I think of my writing as a conversation between the intuition I have that there's a density in some thought that has occurred to me. And then the question for me is, what is it trying to tell me? I don't feel as if I have a finished statement that I'm trying to make. I feel as though I'm trying to understand, why is this important to me? Why have I heard something or seen something that doesn't seem, that has no, it seems full of content without my being able to say why it feels that way to me. It's always a question of following out a very, very strong suggestion that occurs to me that from, of course, can only be a result of my own thinking and so on, but doesn't feel that way to me. It's as if my mind steps beyond. It takes what I know and what I see and so on, and somehow steps beyond it, so that I'm not simply sort of reporting on my interior experience, but something else is happening. The idea of givenness, is important to me, because it seems to me as if so much of experience, maybe all of it, actually is, a great reality for us, in the sense that we live immersed in it, but we don't have an explanation for it. We really can't. It presents itself to us. It becomes us in many ways. But I think when people try to describe what it is and where it comes from, they are simplifying it to the point where they're falsifying it, that consciousness is given to us in a sense, such a richness of complexity, such an otherness in it, really, that it has to be taken as given rather than understood, but processed in order to be recognizable to us as something more familiar and more explicable.
I'm curious, given what you were just saying, Marilynne, what is teaching like for you? What is that experience?
Well, I like teaching. I think that I really, when you read about early human beings, and about the fact that they would, for example, very early, they could navigate great distances over open water, things like that just seem unaccountable in terms of what we can imagine about their state of knowledge and so on. But in order for this to be characteristic of a culture, people were educating each other already. And when you think of them, the brevity of their lifespan in the first place, in the second place, because they were sailing over open water, which probably didn't add many years for most of them, you realize, I'm persuaded that teaching is as profound an instinct in a human being as anything else, and that when you are teaching, you're doing something that comes extraordinarily naturally to you, in the same way that people listen for teaching in a way that is, I always found impressive. Why are you all sitting here paying attention to me? The great question. In any case, I love to teach. I lecture. I tend very much to lecture. Basically because I want to move things off the grounds that have been supplied for them by culture or by other people, frankly. All I can say is it just feels excellent to me.
Caroline, is there anything you want? I have another question, but I want to make room.
No, I was thinking of the instinct for teaching, and I don't do very much of it. I just was in Cremona, Italy, which is the only place I teach once every 2 years. About 3 days, about 12 students came. And I don't feel like I have anything to offer yet, but my mission there was, it was partly sort of, I asked them questions. It was sort of almost like we sat in a circle in a garden every day. It was like group therapy for composers. And what I wanted to is like what I can give them. A lot of them study in Europe, and they've been handed this idea of what being a composer is, which is you must aspire to write an important orchestra piece or an important opera. That is the thing. That then you've arrived. And I said, no, it's like the really small good things. Let's talk about how do you make a small good thing. It's not about writing for these 100 people that you don't know. It's like, who are your friends? Writing for yourself. Then what would you do? And I had this moment with a young student who had all these sort of complexes, I think, given to him by composition teachers about don't write harmony, you shouldn't write this, you shouldn't do that. I said, what would you write for someone that you are falling in love with? What would you want to give to them? What would be the gift? So this is the only thing that I feel like I was able to give to them was the idea of writing as a gift, which is an idea that I got from Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, which someone gave me a copy of 15 years ago, before I'd written really any music. And I think he knew I sort of wanted to write, but I didn't know what, and I didn't know why. And there was some brief moment in that book where she says, imagine you're writing as a gift for someone. And that's the advice I give everyone, is like, it takes your ego away. It's not for you. It's like, what would you want to give as a gift for someone that you care about? But I hope that one day I might be a better teacher than I am now.
I love that. A gift. Yeah. I've had people tell me that about being on stage too. Whatever you need to do to get out of your own ego, like you said, Caroline. Marilynne, if we could circle back for a second to humor, I'm wondering if in this experience that you're talking about, the sort of density of thought that occurs, where you're having this conversation between yourself and kind of intuition, are there moments where humor plays into that for you, like especially maybe in your fiction? And what is that experience like?
Well, I hope there are moments of humor in my fiction. I sometimes find them myself, but it's anomaly, it's surprise, I think, usually that you experience as humor. If you're thinking about something at the level of density that you're able to think of it, you become surprised by the fact that that language can be misleading, or language can be, some sort of idiom can be actually perfect, or, and whenever, or you can find that you've wandered into an area where you are over your own head, or you're repeating an error that has become clear to you in the writing as an error. It's always that feeling of being put slightly off balance, finding an anomaly, that I think is what humor comes from very largely for me when I'm writing.
I love that. That brings me back to another line, Caroline, in your piece where, let me find it. It's my favorite one that I'm still like, I don't know how we're going to play this, but in measure 196 in Nimrod, you want the first violinist to play a jagged tremolo with occasional accents, as if Tilda Swinton was whispering the Gettysburg Address. And to your point, Marilynne, again, it's the element of surprise, like, and Caroline, you also said, we take so seriously, we're playing this quartet, this history of devotion to Beethoven and Haydn and Mozart. And then here comes Caroline, it's like, I really want you to do this. And then it's at the end, Tilda Swinton whispering the Gettysburg Address. Can you talk a little bit more about that instruction? It's a little inside baseball, because we need to figure it out too. So I have you now.
Well, I love Marilynne said it's like putting yourself sort of like being off balance, the anomaly, it's like, yeah, the thing that I thought was underneath my feet is not exactly true, the weird pogo stick. Tilda Swinton, whispering the Gettysburg Address. It's sort of like it's like, not, don't even play it like that, but what does that make you think of? It makes you laugh, and it's kind of, yeah, puts, like, throws you off for a second. I'd forgotten that I'd written that. I also feel like I should do this more. I think I've become really domesticated in the last 5 years, where the documents that I hand to people are a little more standard. but yeah, for Inside Baseball, for advice for playing that, I don't want to prescribe anything. I think it's going to be exactly perfect what you do.
We'll be in touch when we're in
Okay.
rehearsals. Thank you, Caroline. Marilynne, is there more that you wanted to say about this concept of givenness? Because that was definitely something I wanted to make room for.
Well, one of the things that has become a fascination of mine, I realize, is that, the oldest intuition of religion, and I think perhaps art also, is that things are not what they seem. That there's a otherness, a beyondness, a more that kind of haunts attentive people's perception of things. And so, I read to the extent that I can about, contemporary physics, the physics of the 20th century, and that continues, of course. And the fact that you really cannot conceive of, what they call local reality, which is experience as it, in general, we know it and use it, and so, extrapolate from it. And then the profounder reality that is a matter of entanglement and indeterminacy and all the rest of it. It's as if the deepest levels that we have access to of existence cannot be described in the same language as the level of reality with which we normally deal, or that we take to be true, with a kind of Einstein, even his vision of reality, is like Adam. I mean, like Isaac Newton, by comparison with what is known now about the profounder reality of, or existence of matter, of being. So I'm very struck by the fact that we have a concrete, manipulable world, because there's nothing in the profounder sense of what reality is that should imply this. I mean, it's as if we're given a small model of reality within which we can be efficacious, and we can have the sense of knowledge and all the rest of it, so that the local realism of our experience feels like something given to us arbitrarily out of a deeper matrix of reality that does not imply any such thing. And so, I mean, this just, in a way, has become the ruling metaphor for me of the fact that we are given things that are undeniably real and to be dealt with, at the same time that they actually distract us from a better understanding of what reality actually is. And that's arbitrary. That is something given. And that in general, it seems to me to be true, in the sense, I mean, to align itself very well with the larger fact that we cannot take common perceptions of things to be any kind of an understanding of the reality of things. And Western civilization especially has tried very hard to say there is a kind of realism that is the test of everything else, over against which poetry is nonsense and religion is a delusion and all the rest of it. And then you go back and read your Milton, and he seems to have a better understanding of quantum than almost anybody writing now. The intuition of the more profound and other reality, I think, is something that needs to be recovered, because it's true.
Caroline, I wonder if you could also speak a little bit, because I know that you've also talked about sort of quantum physics or the idea of realities a little bit, or at least I'm remembering correctly that that's something that is interesting to you. I don't know if you have something or anything to say in response, or
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me to
oh, I'm
speak.
sorry.
I
know
that's
after
such a
me
beautifully,
too.
like, I was thinking, like, if you want to know anything about the string quartet Nimrod, like, that was a beautiful version of it. This idea of Marilynne, when you were speaking, it's like it's like I followed it, and then there was this like it's literally talking about the multiverse and the idea that we do not know what we know. How do you find the thing that is underneath the otherness? How do you kind of start to like think that maybe you can touch it or even know that it exists, which is an impossible thing to even conceive. And I can say that if I could, my hope for a quartet playing 3 essays, or especially the first essay, is this idea of playing something as if it feels incredibly familiar. This is what we know here. This I've been here before, and then it turns in a way that's like, oh, this is not exactly what I know, but it comes back. It's like, oh, this is brief windows into maybe the thing that I understand and know is not exactly the thing, and what would happen if I let myself drift over into that other corner and then come back. So I just really loved how you kind of how you described that, or attempted to, or did not describe it, Marilynne. It's an impossible thing.
Yes. It's always very interesting to not describe what you're talking about.
Yeah.
This is wonderful. I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to let you live your lives in a couple more minutes. I do have these final 2 questions that I had shared with you. And I also feel like where we just ended would be a beautiful place to end, but I'll pose the questions and then see, how much you want to engage with them. But so this is a question that's quite large, but I think related to what we're talking about and what we've been talking about. And I can't resist to, ask both of you, as great artists working in different disciplines, and we're living in this moment of time that's been described as unprecedented, what do you think is the role of the artist in an unprecedented world? And as artists, how do we approach that unprecedentedness? Is there a way that we can begin to express it?
I think my thought is that there's probably has been a precedent. There's always a precedent for unprecedented times. And maybe the unusual thing now is that we are aware of what other people have been going through that we were not aware of before. The things that have always existed, which we didn't know, were that it's unprecedented that we ourselves in our short time are understanding those other things. As for what we should do, I don't know how to answer that, but try to make things that are gifts in some way, or maybe it's this idea of pointing to the otherness, pointing to the thing that you thought you knew might not be the only thing. Maybe that's it.
I've always felt, that human beings should have a very much higher and different estimation of themselves. Somehow, I mean, when you think what we are, what else in the universe that we can imagine compares? We have these brains that are, they say, the most complex things known to exist in the universe. Everybody has one, which is so lovely. But here we are, all of us, to the extent to we're interested in it and so on. We have the capacity for living at an extraordinary level of perception and understanding and so on, which as a cultures we do actually, even so that we get out ahead of ourselves. But I think it comes down to what is to be valued. What should we not because it should be hoarded or defended in any conscious way, but so that we can have the pleasure of valuing it. that's what value really is, you know? If we could understand what we are and what the people among whom we are also, you know, how that wasn't pretty. How the unthinkably vast privilege of knowing what we know, you know, with all the parentheses around it that you can imagine, but nevertheless, you know, having a sense of the universe, having a sense of the workings of the mind and all the rest of it, having a sense that having the aesthetic sense that allows us to engage with the world at the level of its extreme beauty, you know? I think that if we could, you know, if we could understand ourselves in that way, for one thing, it would make much better sense of the strange human pilgrimage. And for another thing, I think it would make us more careful of the things that would, in fact, shelter life, shelter, you know, prolong everything that is best. I mean, it's, you know, people can look at history and say that it in effect denounces them. You know, you wish that God had come down and scattered the Manhattan Project as effectively as he did the Tower of Babel. But it's mixed. It is tragic and extremely brilliant and beautiful. And the tragedy is very much a consequence of the fact that something so fantastically beautiful is threatened. So, you know, I'm an old-fashioned humanist. I want to encourage people to love the fact of humanity and their own part in it.
This has been a fascinating and rare opportunity to gain insights from you both on the intersection of music and literature and the creative process and being human. Thank you both so much for your time, generosity, and inspiration. And thanks too to our audience for joining us for this special event. We will now have our live performers play a preview excerpt of Caroline Shaw's 3 essays inspired by the writing and voice of Marilynne Robinson. But please do join us for the full performance of this piece tomorrow at Trinity Episcopal Church at 7:30 p.m. as part of our program called Centering Women's Perspectives. And it'll be presented alongside pieces by a range of exciting and diverse contemporary composers. Thank you so much.